All right, just a quick recap of how we got introduced to DMM. I am pastoring a legacy church in Maryland, and we were, in 2018, we became focused on disciple making. We didn't know anything about DMM, but we just knew that God was calling us to disciple making. At the end of 2019, beginning of 2020, one of our staff was doing some research that just coincidentally led her to Chris. She came to me and said, hey, some of us want to do a training where it feels like it's going to be life-changing training. So 30 of us here at the church went through the training, never been on Zoom before, January of 2020. By the time we finished the training, the pandemic was in place. And it was almost like God said, hey, you can't do what you normally did, but I just gave you a bunch of tools to do ministry in ways you didn't actually know about. So that's kind of our story. We've been working through DMM now for a little over 3 years. It has just been, well, the training was one paradigm shift after another, and it continues to be paradigm shift after paradigm shift. And so I just jotted down, I thought this was what you all asked of us, so I'm going to just give you a few things that I feel like we've learned. So here you go. Here's what we are learning, and I guess I would say we are currently learning this, but we have also begun to learn it. Remember in the paper game where there was a line drawn that wasn't really necessary. So I think what we're realizing is be careful not to draw new lines. That the truth is we can do the same thing with DMM that we've done with legacy churches. We just say, oh, I see how Brent's doing it, and so I'm going to draw a line the way Brent's doing it or the way somebody else is doing it. There is something about drawing lines that gives us comfort and living in the, hey, God, help lead me every day, and let me make sure I'm listening to you directly. That I guess is just a little bit more effort than saying, well, I'm just going to do what Brent did or Susie did or Chris did or whatever. So I would say we're learning not to be careful not to draw new lines in DMM the same way that we may have drawn lines in legacy ministry before us, before that. Chris has said, everybody has said this, but we have to let God tell us specifically what he wants us to do. When we first got trained, it kind of felt like, all right, well, Chris transitioned out of his church. I guess we need to transition out of our church. And so, you just begin to say, well, if I'm going to do this right, again, it's almost like drawing lines. I got to do what other people that are teaching me doing. And yet God just continued to press other things on us. And so we have tried to be as obedient as we can. And so I really want to say your elder team, your team, whoever your team is, to just continue to be in prayer and say, God, we don't want to duplicate what anybody else is doing unless that's what you want. We want to hear from you individually. That is some hard work, but it's great team building. I've seen God do amazing things through just allowing him to speak into us about what our unique mission is. I would say what surprised me the most about our particular situation is that God seems to have pressed us into MDM as much as he is to DMM. And I remember talking about MDM when we were in San Diego, and people were like, what's MDM? I swear I heard it here. It's mobilizing disciples to become disciple makers. It's mobilizing disciple makers. And DMM is, creating disciple making movements. So because the pandemic hit, we had nothing else to do with this congregation other than to say, hey guys, we can't meet together the way we normally did. So we want to train all of you to do discovery Bible studies. And we're going to invite all of you. We help them begin to figure out how can you reach out to your family, your neighbors, your friends. And so God not only opened that door, but basically we just saw people grab hold of it. Now, again, it's not nothing's 100%, but it seems like what God has shown us is there is a lot of fruit in mobilizing the church. Again, maybe that's just unique to us. We're maybe others are seeing something different, but we are finding our way in mobilizing the disciple makers, or mobilizing the church to become disciple makers. And I think that's been going to be a critical part of creating a disciple making movement, is not just to move into new disciples, although I think we've got to do both. We've got to mobilize the church into disciple making, and we've got to go and get them into the world. I mean, that's one of our principles of the sales, right, is to train up believers to go into the world. And so we've leveraged everything. I think when we first basically understood DMM, we were trying to figure out what to do with it. And God has just shown us that his desire for us right now is to leverage everything about who we are into disciple making. I would say we've moved from attractional to fractional. And the idea is we no longer care. And believe it or not, I'm just amazed. Our board has we took the board through this training after the staff got it. They've embraced disciple making movement concepts. We're no longer building our castle. We're trying to figure out how to build God's kingdom. And that's an interesting place to be. So by what I mean by fractional is, hey, we're saying, hey, you got to go out. It's reshaped how we do Sunday morning. Sunday morning is no longer an attraction. It's the family coming together and basically saying, this is the time to refill, get equipped, share stories, encourage each other, because we're going right back out again after this time of gathering, and we're going to keep making disciples. So we're sending people out in sort of a fractional way instead of getting everybody to try and come here. God has been teaching us. If I go too fast, just tell me. I'm trying to get through this so we can get in our groups. But God has been teaching us in many ways the power of micro shifts. When you're teaching people just for knowledge, I think that's one thing. Teaching people to obey takes us slowing things down. We learn obedience in probably smaller ways than what we have done in terms of telling concepts. We can get big concepts across to people. But if you're trying to get people to obey, there's a book, I read some of it, called Atomic Habits. And so he talks about the multiplying out of small changes. And we've taken that to heart in terms of teaching people to obey, that they're probably not going to go from where they are to where God wants them to be overnight. Hey, neither did I. But the truth is, if we help them see micro shifts that they can make in their behavior, micro shifts that they can make in their week, it really has helped them, because that way they actually feel like, hey, I'm moving forward. I can see what I can do next. I can see the way to move through this, instead of feeling like it's just an overwhelming task. Part of that, this is all part of what God is doing in terms of mobilizing disciple makers, is that you have to fight the whirlwind. The whirlwind is always a problem for us, even if you're outside of the legacy church. The whirlwind is all that other stuff that takes up time in your schedule that you think, I ought to get to something, but I can't because, man, I've got too much stuff to do. We all know, if you've been a part of a legacy church, hey, legacy churches create stuff to do. And so fighting the whirlwind is an ongoing battle in order to get practicing and being a practitioner of what God is doing. And the other thing that I would say is, if you're staying in the legacy church, or God's got you working in a legacy church, it is a constant battle to fight against the drift back toward what we know culturally. I really think that's one of the biggest issues or one of the biggest reasons to stay in ongoing coaching. If we don't keep reminding ourselves and seeing new ways to practice what we've learned and getting reinforcements in that, then everything we've been enculturated in Christian culture will just keep slipping back in. So it's a battle. You have to keep fighting it. It's a battle worth fighting, but it keeps going. This is a weird one, but I don't know how this will go over with all of you. If you've been practicing disciple making, then lessons 9 through 12 are really helpful. We all got lessons 1 through 8, probably. If you've not had lessons 9 through 12, then Susie, Brent, Jim, Chris, hey, get another 9 through 12 going. You don't need them to start practicing, but I think they actually enrich the picture in ways that are really helpful. When we first signed up for the training, Chris promised us 12, and then he reneged on it and only gave us 8. And so we asked for a refund, got a partial refund. But the truth is that we went back and got him to do the 9 through 12. And it just, I think, man, anyway, 9 through 12 are helpful. I just want to say that. They really are helpful things. One of the things that has amazed me about disciple making in the way that God's deployed it here in our setting is culture change. I mean, I can't remember who said this. You all know this. Culture change eats strategy for lunch. If you want to change the culture in your life or in your team, man, culture change comes best when it's peers influencing peers. One of the best things that we did was when my staff said, Kevin, put a microphone up on the platform and let people tell their stories of what God's doing as they're making disciples. Anybody who's been the pastor of a legacy church knows you never put a microphone up unscripted and let crazy people come up and talk in your service. That's church 101. And so I was scared to death, but we did it. And oh my goodness, has that done more? Because they write us all off as pastors and leaders and say, well, you can do that, but I could never do that. But when the guy sitting next to them in the pew stands up and says, here's what happened in my school, or here's how I did this, here's how I began to invite someone, and they see them. I mean, we have people seriously trembling at the microphone. They're shaking, they're so nervous. And because they never gotten up before and said anything. And they just stand up in the service. That's right. It's what happens in the sauna stays in the sauna. But you start hearing, hey, that makes sense to me. I could do that. It doesn't come off so professional. It doesn't have that expert tie to it. It just has the authenticity of, I didn't know what to do. And we've had a lot of people sharing their mistakes. Man, nothing encourages progress like people being authentic and saying, I didn't get it right the first time. And then just encouraging, it encourages, I think, that atmosphere where I don't have to be perfect. I don't have to get this right the first time, but God can still use me in the middle of all that. So if you want to change the culture, I think like what we just had, Chris sharing his story of how he, figured that out just helps us to have ideas, and it sparks something in us that's like, oh man, I didn't even think about, doing that with folks. If you're still leading a church and you want to transition it to DMM, to more of a disciple making movement in some way, people are going to leave. That's just going to happen. You're not going to service what they want, what they came for. You've changed on who they are. But here's what we have found. This has been astounding. We gave up trying to build our church, right? We just said, okay, we're going to build the kingdom. Forget what's going on here. But we've had people coming. The people who are new to our church are more excited about disciple making than the people who have been here. Because the reason they came is somewhere in the community, somebody said, oh my gosh, this church is talking about making disciples. This church is talking about training people to go out in the community. I've heard so-and-so. And so they're like, that's what I've been looking for. And so it's really been kind of amazing what's happening in terms of who's coming to our church and just how they're engaging and they're coming and getting engaged right away. Some of the stories are people who have been here like 3 weeks, and they'll just say, you know what, I came here for this reason. Here's what I've been doing. And it's kind of amazing. There is a deep spiritual hunger in the world. I think we all know that. People are hungry. I think one of the reasons I love Discovery Bible Study Method so much is that people are spiritually hungry, but they're tired of Christians telling them what to believe. They do want to discover it. I really do think there's power in that. Here's the crazy thing. Church people are spiritually hungry too. And church people are tired of hearing preachers tell them what to believe. And so if we can teach them, or we can help them to begin to have their own discovery. And here's the other thing that I think we've found. They want to get beyond 2 Timothy 3:5, but they don't know how to voice that. You all know 2 Timothy 3:5, right? They had the form of godliness, but they denied its power. Church people are hungry for power encounters. Church people are hungry. And I mean, some of that, of course, is just they want the signs and wonders maybe in ways that aren't that great, but they want their faith to be alive. And we've made it an academic exercise. And when you begin to help them find out what it's like to actually learn one thing, do one thing, share one thing, when they begin to get into that, they're like, this is what I've been longing for my whole life. This feels like church to me. And so there is a deep hunger, at least we're seeming to find it. There's a deep hunger for something beyond church as usual. I think the reason why so many people are leaving church is they're done with church as it is, church as we've kind of constructed it. And so there's a deep hunger there. It seems like we keep tapping into that, or God's tapping into that. And so don't discount. I mean, we all know this. Church people aren't necessarily Jesus people. But so there's a mission field in the church. One of the things God said to me years ago after he called me, or I was willing to at least listen to his invitation, his call on my life for pastoral ministry, was basically that very thing. Kevin, the church is one of the most needed mission fields in the culture today. And so it is a place where I think people want to be taught how to be disciples and how to be disciple makers. It means a change in our whole church culture. The pandemic for us gave us a way to make, one of the things that happened for us was we had the chance to change the culture because we were in the middle of the pandemic. As the pandemic was basically winding down, every one of us in the leadership team was like, we can't go back. I hope these people don't think we're going back. We're not going back to who we were before. We're not going back to that model. And we did have some folks that I think were disappointed that we didn't go back, but we'd had enough time with the pandemic for them to go, holy mackerel, this is something. I'm loving what this is. And we want to see more of that. The other thing I think that we've learned is, or another thing is, where you are probably isn't where you're going to stay. When we first got trained, we thought, well, man, there's no way that this church that I'm pastoring right now is 222 years old. This ain't no Chris 10-year churchy thing here where you just fold it down because you're the founding pastor. But we are leaving the denomination that we have been a part of for 222 years. We just voted to do that. We're moving out of that. And while we thought that we were going to probably at best, because after we got trained, we began to investigate other streams of DMM, trying to figure out what all was out there. And we ran into Roy Moran. We began to, we read his book. We began to interview Roy, and we thought maybe hybrid is where we want, but we're at the place where I would say, I think the spectrum that we have calls it transition. I would call it leveraged, that we are leveraging everything toward disciple making. And, but we never thought we would be here. And where we are right now is there is a very high possibility that we will relaunch somewhere in the future based on the vision that God's given us. But we're just trusting him to lead us there in the right time. And so I guess what I would say is hold everything lightly, because where God starts you is probably not where he's going to end you. And that's okay. That's just be used to the fact that the journey is going to take you places you didn't think that you might go. That probably ought to go along with the fact that you also, God's inviting us to be willing to sacrifice almost everything that we thought we might need to not sacrifice in order to really be usable in his hands, which is, constantly an issue. The last thing I would say is, God, I think just keeps showing us that everything, this is going back to Chris's sauna, everything and anything can be a possibility and an opportunity for disciple making. Here's a story just from today. The county that I live in, like, counties across the culture, across our country, they have decided to push diversity issues into the elementary schools, and there's no opt-out for parents. So parents are upset, like, wait a minute, you're teaching kids things that I don't want my kids exposed to, that's too young, and you're not letting us have an opt-out moment. We can't find out about it. So that's raised some issue for parents here. And so we had some parents asking us, and I think they wanted the church to begin to wield its power. And I don't know exactly what they meant, but we said we would be glad to meet with them. So I met with a group of parents yesterday to hear their concerns and to basically just kind of have an idea. And we began to talk about what do you do when the culture is just heading farther and farther away? Well, today, we had good conversation yesterday. We had more parents come today. And so I trained them how to do a DBS and basically said, listen, the way to contradict or the way to protect and influence your kids is to stop letting the church and somebody else disciple your kids. You disciple your kids. And I'm going to give you a tool. I'm going to give you a tool because what influence you have in your home is going to outstretch any influence outside of your home. And so I sat with a bunch of parents. Again, there were parents. Yesterday was parents mostly from our church. Today, it was a bunch of parents from the community because those parents went home and said, hey, I really think you might be interested in what we're talking about in terms of, their kids they're fired up about it. So today I gave them, we did a DBS together. I gave them, most of the people that were there today were moms. And I said, listen, I've given you a bunch of scripture sets that I would like to encourage you to do with your husbands, to do this as a couple. But then I've also given you a lot of scripture sets to do as a family. And then I talked about how to do we did a discovery Bible study and talked about how to do them. So the crazy thing is there are always kinds of opportunities to help people understand how to become disciple makers and how to take their own questions and their own struggles and say, hey, Jesus has an answer to that. And let me teach you how to obey his word, because that's where the power is going to be. And then we'll move forward through that. So I think I left plenty of time there. Those are just some of the things that God has been teaching us. We're humbled by this. I think what I would say in sort of just closing this out is, for my 30-some years of ministry, I have often felt and seen how heavy the burden is on pastors. Most of the pastors that I know, and I think the majority of that in my own life and the majority of that in the pastors that I've traveled with, is that we have been trying to do ministry out of our own strength. And I think one of the best things that disciple making has really helped us to see is only God can build his kingdom. And if we will just obey the principles that he's given us, we get to sit back and watch what he's going to do. And there's just joy in ministry as opposed to burden in ministry. And the heaviness becomes joy, and the difficulty becomes freedom. And so I'm just grateful that God happenstanced us into disciple making movement training. And I love spending every Wednesday with you all. We have a vision to see the whole DC area saturated with disciple making. And so we're building partnerships like never before. Many of the folks on this call are a part of that. It's not something, I don't take credit for that. I'm just a part of that. And man, it is really just amazing what we can do when we begin to see. Even today, I had a training. Grace is a part of that training. We had a training, small training, maybe the smallest training we've ever done. But it's probably one of the best trainings we've ever done. And you can see we did lesson 4 today. And I can see the paradigm shifts. I can see and hear the life change happening in these people that are in our training right now. And it's just, like I said, it's no longer a burden. It's not heavy lifting, because God is doing the work as we just pass on what God has given us. So thanks so much for letting me share with you all today.